Um, Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Without wasting any further time, I would like to greet everyone, especially Pick n Pay, and thank you for coming before us this morning. I'm sorry I'm late, traffic problems. I woke up very, very early, I'll show you. My name is Lula Mamtanga. I'll be chairing these public hearings, and I have been chairing them due to Professor Helton Shiddles being unavailable due to unforeseen circumstances, and I'll be chairing them up until Monday. And I would like my two colleagues who will be assisting me today to introduce themselves. Thereafter, I'll ask the Pick n Pay delegation, especially those people who will be answering questions or participating in this public hearing, to also introduce themselves. And then I would like to maybe like you to give us a guidance as to how you intend to proceed, and then you can proceed.
Good morning. My name is Sonal Grimbeek. I'm a principal economist at the Commission, and I'm leading the technical team that's working on the grocery retail inquiry.
Good morning. My name is Thabo Khumalo. I'm the senior legal counsel working on the inquiry.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the panel. We're very pleased as Pick n Pay to have the opportunity to take part in this public hearing today. That conclusion. And another way of assessing the total size of the market is to look at consumption data. And again, we turn to Stats SA for this purpose. Its data on consumption of food, beverages, tobacco, and household goods in 2016 produces a total grocery retail market of 771 billion rand, which, as you can see, is, I think, encouragingly close to the total that I gave a moment ago of 805 billion rand using turnover data and the Nielsen estimate of the informal market. And when you add up the four published turnovers, South African turnovers of the four largest retailers, that's simply done by looking at their audited and published accounts. Those four largest retailers account for no more than 35% of the total market. As you can see, there is a huge difference between the 35% of the total market and a claim of 90% of the total market. Now, even if we were to say, all right, the figure on the informal market is an estimate done by Nielsen, if we were to exclude that entire 40% of the informal market and simply relied on the data on the formal market, the four largest players would still have a share of no more than 55% of the formal market, which is still, I think, significantly short of the 90% estimated by or claimed by the Commission. And of the total market, which is either the consumption number or the production number that I gave for the total market, our business, Pick n Pay, accounts for under 9% of that total market. Now, the question then is whether that total share, which we've put on the slide as 35% for the four largest retailers, constitutes concentration, which the Commission is concerned about. Clearly, it's way below the 90% quoted by the Commission, but we did seek briefly to benchmark it internationally on the next slide, and this is how it looks. And what this chart shows is that the share of the total market held by the top four retailers in this country is well below those of other markets in the world, which are nonetheless seen and deemed to be competitive. So that concludes the first part of my presentation, which we do believe, as you will have seen from an earlier slide that I presented, the largest retailer in the market now has a market share which is some way in excess of ours. So in a fluid and dynamic market, new entrants emerge in a fluid and dynamic market, we do see fluctuations in market share in the way that we would expect to as the customer rewards or fails to reward retailers. We do also, and this is my final set of points on this presentation. You do also see new entrants emerging and growing rapidly, and this is slide 21 of my presentation. And again, you may want to look at it in more detail at your leisure, but I will highlight only 2 points. The first one is that if you look at Fruit and Veg City and Choppies as the most obvious examples of successful new entrants over the past decade or so, in the period between 2012 and 2015, the compound annual growth rates in turnover for those two companies were 22.5% and 20.7% respectively. You'll see that that is some way in excess of the largest, more established retailers, with our compound annual growth rate for Pick n Pay at 5.9%. And I think as you've heard from one of those retailers this week, and I think the other is participating at the beginning of next week, I believe they have demonstrated the absence of material barriers to entry or fundamental impediments to growth in this market. And then to underline this point in respect of the independent sector, and I think you have heard from a number of sources this week about what I think is a fairly widely held view that the independent sector in this country is dynamic and is thriving. And I think my final slide in this section shows that, slide 22. And I think, again, I will summarize this simply, that since 2009, for every new branded supermarket opening, large supermarket, or supermarket being opened by one of the large players, an additional 69 independent stores open for each one of those opened by the large players. So, sincerely, so if you forgive me, Chairperson, let me just make sure I don't get that wrong. The Barclays report, I believe, or we believe, reaches an incorrect assessment of the size of the overall market. So it understates the size of the overall market, and therefore it looks at the turnovers of the four largest retailers. I can't, if you forgive me, remember the exact number that they give for the size of the market, but they do understate the size of the market. Now, I think to be honest, if somebody spends some time on this, they will come to the same conclusion quite easily, because if you look at the four retailers that are included in that claim, and those would be ShopRite, Checkers, Pick n Pay, Spar, and Woolworths, then for the rest of the market to be only 10% of the total market, one would have to conclude that Massmart, for example, whether through its retail business or through its wholesale business in supplying independent stores and the informal sector, so Massmart, combined with some of the other retailers who are appearing before the public hearing, such as Choppies, Fruit and Veg City, plus all the other independents and the informal sector, were squeezed into that remaining 10%. And I think the data shows that that is simply not credible. And a very quick look at Massmart's published turnover will demonstrate that in respect of that Barclays report, the conclusion they reach is unfortunately factually incorrect and not credible. The second of those reports, the Who Owns Whom report,
the Massmart published results, will those be focused on groceries only? Just groceries?
Sorry, Chairperson.
You're saying if you were to contrast the Barclays total market, that 10% where they put in Massmart and others, and Choppies you've mentioned, and then you say if one looks at Massmart and Choppies, for example, and just looking at Massmart's own results, would those be results relating to groceries only that you're talking about? Exclusively grocery?
As to the overall size of the market. But we will, as Mr. Norton has indicated, set that out and respond to the specific points that you've made.
Okay. In the interest of time, Mr. North, I won't respond to what you've just said, and we will wait for the written submission that you'll be making on this point.